Get over to Deuteronomy chapter 6. Deuteronomy chapter 6. We're going to start in verse 1 here in just a moment. But our theme is this morning for the next few weeks is going to be family strong. Family strong. Can you raise your hand if you can hear me well, or if we're coming through okay? Okay, great. Awesome. So family strong. And so, there's just so much we could talk about with this subject, because family is a part of all of our lives. Mm-hmm. All of us have family. All of us have experiences with family. And so there's so much that we could talk about. But what we wanted to kind of focus on over these next few weeks is these three areas of conversation, Can you guys hear me now? Sue said you guys couldn't hear me. Okay, I think we're doing all right. Okay, good. I won't ask that again, just not be annoying with that question. Devin, I'm just going to rely on Devin.
We couldn't hear you.
To guide us when it comes to that. But we had a really great time there in Atlanta talking about family strong conversation and connection and character. And I know that it's an area that all of us really want to excel in. It's an area that we all want to find God's design in, because it's so important. Family is so important to all of our experience in life. It's so important in terms of our kind of what we leave behind in this world and the impact that we make on this world. And it's kind of cool to go back to Genesis and just look for a moment at what God thinks about family. It's kind of interesting because in Genesis chapter 1, God was so fired up. He was so excited about what he had just created. And it says that with humans, God blessed them. And he said to them, be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. And after he created if it's very good to God, it's just amazing to us. And so God created family as kind of the original team. And so God created family so that we wouldn't have to be lonely. He said, it's not good for man to be alone. And so he created the woman, and of course they created their kids and their family. And it was the first team. It's the most basic fundamental unit of humanity is family. And so much of life starts to kind of build from that, and the health of that. It's kind of interesting, though, that even in the book of Genesis, that families started to kind of go haywire pretty early. And there was a lot of challenges. There was a lot of joys in family, but there was also a lot of complexity to it. And, we see early on with Cain and Abel that, that they had a rivalry. And for whatever reason, mom and dad weren't able to really step in there and help them with that. And so Cain killed Abel, and it just started creating some of these damaging cycles that are so challenging sometimes in our family dynamic and in our heritage. And so, it's interesting because God was so excited when he created humans, but then humans thought they knew better than God. And they started to go away from God's plan for humans. And that's when the chaos started. That's when the damage started. And I've heard, talked about as Cain and Abel, that they started this cycle of injury where we became incredibly competitive with one another. We became fearful of one another. And so we tried to dominate one another. And so they started this cycle. And it wasn't God's original plan. It was God's plan for other things, for love and connection. But we took matters into our own hands. And I really believe that the hope that we have in Christ, and the hope that we have, is that we can go back to God's design, and we can excel in life. We can excel in family. And that's really what Deuteronomy chapter 6 is about. It's really about God trying to help his people get back to the basics and get back to some of the basic, simple principles that are so important for us to live life well and for us to do well in family. Mm-hmm. And he talks about it here in Deuteronomy 6 and starting in verse 1. You guys all there? Awesome. Thanks, guys. So it says, chapter 6, verse 1 says, "These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that." So here's the rules and the different guidelines. Says, "So that your children and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life." God really wants us to enjoy incredible lives. Yeah. He wants our life to be filled with the joy of the Lord. Verse 3 says, "Hear, O Israel, and be careful to obey, that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your fathers, promised to you." Mm-hmm. Again, God wants to provide the resources for us to thrive. God wants to provide the direction and the help for us to thrive. And God wants to kind of set that tone for us to thrive. And that's why he's giving us these directives. But he's not only just giving us direction, he's giving us love. And he's giving us his protection. He's giving us his grace. And in verse 4 it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength." You know, this is kind of the centerpiece. It's the core verse of the universe when it comes to God. It's the core verse of the Bible. Because what it talks about is God is one, and Jesus refers to this multiple times. He says, you know, the most important thing, the thing that everything else hangs on, is this: the Lord our God is one. Love him with all your whole being, with everything about you. Connect with him. And that's where health really comes. That's where the source of health really is. But then he said, it's interesting because he teaches this massive concept in these verses. And in verse 6 says, "These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts." And so God is really concerned, we learn in the scriptures, about our hearts. He's not just looking to the outside. He's not just looking to behavior. He's really looking to the inside, into our heart. He says, "These commandments that I give you are to be upon your hearts." It's not just about blind obedience. It's not just about doing the right thing. Yeah. It's about these things that he's talking to us about are from his heart and really to be on our hearts. He says, "Impress them on your children." And then he says something very, very practical that we can all do. He says, "Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses." Yeah. You know, it's interesting to me, and we've talked about this a little bit. It looks like our internet is a little bit unstable. You guys hear me okay? Devin, are we good? Okay, great. God's got great intentions for us, and family is a real part of that. We come from different family backgrounds. We have different family experiences. And certainly Sue and I come from our own family backgrounds and have our own family experiences. And we're not experts at all. But we have found certain concepts from the Bible that have worked for us and have kind of stood out to us. One of those is the role of talking and conversation in our family. You know, God says, how do we impress it on our hearts? Well, we talk about, it says here, we talk about the things of God when we sit down at home, when you walk along the road, and when you lie down and when you get up. Sue and I really believe that home is the headquarters for spiritual development. But that's where we have the greatest opportunity to really forge a heart for God and a love for God and a faith in God, a trust in God is in the home. That's what he talks about. Talk about them when you sit at home. So we've been sitting at home a lot. This quarantine has given us maybe a special opportunity to put this one into practice. Yeah. In quarantine, while you're sitting at home a lot, well, what should we talk about? Well, one of the things is talking about God, talking about the things of God. He says when you walk along the road, the people in these times do a lot of walking. I know we do a lot of walking in Vermont. Yeah, when you lie down and when you get up. So what he's saying is talk about it all the time. Laying down, getting up, walking in the home, all the time. It should be a part of our conversation. In Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, Proverbs 4:23, it says, above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. God's words and this conversation about God is really meant to guard our hearts and develop our hearts and help our hearts to be healthy and strong. In Proverbs chapter 20, verse 5, it says, the ways of a human are deep waters, and a man of understanding draws them out. One of the things about family is that it humbles us a lot. It keeps us humble because there's times of fun, but there's also a lot of times of forgiveness. There's times of love, but there's also a lot of times of learning. There's a lot of times of faith in kind of mountaintop things, but there's also a lot of times of fear and us trying to work through our fears. There's great times of aspiration and dreaming, but there's also times of apologizing and having those heart-to-heart talks where they have the opportunity to bond even more deeply. But so much of it is about conversation. So that's really what we want to talk about today, is talking about God and how to be people who are able to have those heart-to-heart conversations that change us, that give us hope, that connect us to one another, and that really connect us to God. So Sue's going to share.
Oh, are you going to read that?
I did Proverbs 20, verse 5.
Yeah, you said that.
I just referred to it.
Okay.
Was Sue listening? I was just referring to that verse, and she wasn't even sure I read it.
The reason I said it because that's the passage you taught me how to become, because I'm a good talker, but I'm not necessarily a great listener. So it helped me realize that all these areas we get to be taught and grow in, because I have no problem with the conversation part. I have a lot more trouble with the listening and drawing the heart out. And I learned that from him. I'm speaking for Kenzie and for me. She kind of
We're losing you again. Steve and Sue, you guys should probably call.
It's still true today. God and my family haven't felt far due to our regularity of connection, the obvious importance that has been placed on both, and the love that has made up for whatever tries to get in the way. Family is at the heart of it all and is a crucial part of seeing our God. And I just thought, I'll never forget that day where she's like, oh, you Dude Sixed us. And it kind of became kind of her thing, just that privilege to be able to have that conversation. And it kind of reminded me of just how much, really our relationship with each other as family, whether it's our roommates, I learned the most about being a good parent by being a small group leader and leading a Bible talk, actually, because I learned how to try to put those things into place. So a lot of that came from that too. Mm-hmm. But I think when I think of that Deuteronomy 6, I do think of walking and talking, and just like with Nick, he's kind of my shoulder guy, where he and I could walk. We've literally walked to Starbucks in Tokyo, in Massachusetts, in New Jersey, in Connecticut. Our connection time was shoulder to shoulder, walking and talking, where Kenzie got addicted to caffeine way too early in her life, because our connection was like coffee talk, staring at each other, looking each other in the eyes, and just going deep fast. Where Nick and I's was different. And I think that's kind of the specialness about each one of us, is we kind of open up and talk differently. Steve and I are like that. He's more of shoulder, let's go for a walk. And that's when his heart opens up. And so I learned that a lot, of just the privilege to be able to have the opportunity to kind of have that walking and talking connection. And I think it's amazing because it does remind us that God is all about walking and talking. And even in the Old Testament, it really refers to faith being a walk with God.
Yep.
And then this is the other thing that Kenzie said that I thought was kind of interesting. She said, it is this precedent, this Deuteronomy 6 precedent, that has made God feel approachable and as part of the family. Feeling first loved and listened to by my family and knowing that God is a part of their core has been imperative in me opening up my heart to him and his vision. God hasn't felt like this weird uncle I'm obligated to talk to on Wednesdays and Sundays, but my friend, my dad, who's with me everywhere I go and has been a necessary part of the story since before I even existed. And I think that's just been really cool for us, is like trying to grow in that place, but that our relationship it's a walk, it's not a slot. And even with each other, learning that. The other thing was that at the dinner table, a lot of times, especially Steve and I, when we were in Connecticut for those 7 years, we both had a few different jobs to try to make ends meet. And so a lot of times, even at the dinner table, the dinner devotional will be led by Nick. And I think Nick was in 7th grade. The next day would be led by Kenzie. And it was kind of that spirit of like, we all have something to bring to the table. And I think that conversation that's so mutual with each other, that we all bring something that's very special and unique to the table. So that has been really cool. So the first thing is just the privilege of Deuteronomy 6ing and just the power of walking and talking. The second thing is, like I said, is Steve really taught me how to draw people's hearts out. Like, he is so good at asking good questions. And I typically don't like silence, so I'd fill it up with words. And I think it helped me to learn. And I would watch over and over again. I'd be chopping vegetables where we lived in Connecticut. And those are sort of the most formative years, I think, with our kids, because they were 4th grade up to high school and stuff. But, and Dad would still be in the car with Nick talking, like sometimes for an hour, or he'd be listening to Kenzie cry about wanting to quit swim team and just sitting there listening. And just like the ability to just kind of have space to, and I learned that from him, that just sometimes it's just the power of listening. And letting that other person kind of really get their heart out instead of, and my challenge, Mackenzie would usually say earlier on, she trained me up a lot because she would say, Mom, stop trying to relate to me. Because in my thing, I'm like, when Kenzie's talking, I'm going to interrupt her and go, oh, I can totally relate. Like that she knows that I really get her. Right. But a lot of times she was just trying to go, can you just listen? And then the other thing is too, is I had to really learn in my parenting, but also in life, is to not react and really respond, because I'm very readable, right, Nick? Like, you can tell how I'm doing pretty, like, obviously how I feel about something. And so sometimes Nick would even ask me stuff. Actually, I had to do with when he was dating Bree too. But anyway, where I'd be just like reacting, wanting like to protect him about not because of Bree. Just anyway, it's a long story. But when, as a mama bear, I sometimes can react to stuff, and then it doesn't let a person draw their heart out. Or Kenzie said, if you react to that, then I don't want to tell you what my friend did, because then when you see her, you'll think that way about her. And it was really helpful for me to learn from them when I wasn't safe in conversations, if that makes any sense. But that to me has been huge. And the thing about listening is one of the things that Kenzie says here, and then I'm going to turn it over to Nick and Bree in a second. But she said, you know, the mutuality of the give and take in conversation. She said, my mom and I my favorite memories are my mom and I sitting on the dock fishing and reading a chapter of John together and talking about our friendship with Jesus. It was that father, son, mother, daughter kind of time. But she said, she goes, all of us, all 4 of us, were always asking each other for input on whatever we were going through. But sometimes Dad didn't have the right answer. And sometimes I didn't have, sometimes Nick had but there was just that mutuality and just how important that was in our lives. And then, so that's when I think of listening but I know it's an art form. You got to talk to people that are really good at drawing the heart out, because I definitely learned that. And then lastly, just home is sort of the safe place to sort life out. And if that kind of, when Steve said headquarters are at home, I think what hit us a lot growing up is like home should be that place, or your household of your roommates, or just home is each other. It's not necessarily a building, but it's that safe place to sort life out, that it should be a place where we only had two rules in our family. One time I told the kids, I scolded them, and I'm like, guys, go to your room. And they just started laughing hilariously because like I never sent them to their room. So like they were actually really good kids. But anyway, but they sort of like, right, like you're going to send us to, anyway, long story short. But the only rules we had in our house too, one was to show love and respect. And then the other rule was treat each other the way you wanted to be treated. And so that applied to all of us. And so kind of the only kind of pillars was our life was kind of wrapped around those two particular principles. And everything else kind of most things fell under those categories. But anyway, so the conversation at home, like home needed to be a place where any topic could be talked about without fear of reaction, that like from the bullying to guy-girl relationships to sex to drugs to lying to, any of the things that were going on, because if my kids aren't talking about it with me, I don't want them talking to them that their authority is the internet or it's some kid down the street. But there really is just this sense that that safe place. Yeah. And that was like that for me. I would come home. I worked 7:30 in the morning until 9 at night with kids all day in school. And then I coached all night. And I'd come home going, I haven't talked to anybody over the age of 10 and 12. And I needed my family to be there for me, to help me as I was going. Like, it was just safe for all of us, safe space for all of us. Yeah. And then the last thing I was just going to share from Kenzie and then give it over to Nick and Bree. But that safe place to sort life out, what Mackenzie refers to it now, she says, she shares this, she goes, and don't get me wrong, I haven't been a perfect daughter by any means. I haven't told my parents everything about my journey and my inner battles. My parents don't always say the right thing or comfort me in the exact right way. But my family has been open-armed for me and invested in me in these moments despite their imperfections. As I've learned, especially I've gotten older, that when nobody can kind of fill that God-shaped hole, my Heavenly Father does, and He is also open-hearted, yet He's perfect. And I think that that's helped a lot too, is that safe space that we're creating is also, sometimes we don't have all the answers. And as a mom, I hate sometimes that my kids have to struggle, but that's the part of like, especially those bullying times. I'm like, how come Kenzie could come home from stuff and Nick, Steve, and I, her biggest cheerleaders, can't encourage her? Like, we're the encouraging champions. And it used to like be so sad. And then I realized it was only God that could hug her heart. And it's something that God was trying to develop in her. And even as she's 23, she's like, even though I still say my same insecurities, I still know that my highs and lows is only my parents that can be there for me, but only God can hug my heart. And as a parent, you kind of want to go, I want to protect them all, instead of going, will you let God be their parent? And I think that
could you guys introduce yourselves too? Great job.
We missed the last line the mom said. I don't know if you want to repeat your last little concluding line. It was, I bet it was epic. So.
Oh, it got cut off?
Oh, it did?
You got cut off kind of the last couple sentences.
Oh, did you hear the part about only God can hug Kenzie's heart, not me?
Yes, right after that. That's it. Love it. Actually, I really loved a lot of times too, I guess when I was older, when my mom would react, because I kind of needed my mom to be the person that like stood like and fought for me. And I was like, Mom, I'm not going to really take much of your advice in this moment, but I needed you to kind of be my mama bear right there and come to my aid, because it just made me feel good, and I needed a little bit of a cheerleader in that way. But I was like, yeah, probably wasn't the greatest input, and probably need to follow some of these other people on this one. But thanks for coming to my aid. But Hey, thanks for just letting us join this morning.
Yeah.
And it's really is great to be with you guys. I feel like in many ways, obviously over the last few months, just hearing from mom and dad, like a lot of different stories about you guys and joining some of the live services over the last few weeks. And then, you know, with Bree's parents getting to join a couple of weeks ago and stuff, we've heard a lot about you guys and feel really just grateful, you know, to meet the famous Burlington church. And I think, you know, for me too, just having different relationships with people like Chris, you know, where he came to my grandparents' house in New Hampshire, or being in a study with Nathan the other day, you know, a couple of weeks ago, or going to teen camp with people like Jesse, you know, and or people like Euro, and, you know, just kind of different relationships and stuff like that. Going to Kenya and South Africa with Mackenzie neighbors, you know, and that was awesome. And so there's all these little just connections and stuff like that. And so we feel really grateful to just hang with you guys and be part of all this kind of stuff. And so thanks for letting us join. You know, Bree and I, I grew up, you know, kind of in California, New England combo. Bree grew up in North Carolina. And now we live in Atlanta. We've been working with the campus ministry here for the last few years. We work primarily at Georgia State University, which is kind of this downtown, right next to the, you know, right in the heart, right next to the Capitol building down here in Atlanta, right next to like all the Martin Luther King stuff, and kind of like where right next to the church that he preached at and stuff like that. His house is a couple blocks away. So it's really been cool to work down there, downtown Atlanta. But you know, over the next couple of weeks, we're actually going to be switching to more working with youth and family ministry here, which we're really excited about. And so family has definitely been a lot more on our minds, and things that we just been kind of thinking about a lot more, and trying to figure out our own upbringings and what we loved about it, what we would change. And so, you know, it's just been kind of fun going back, you know, through some of those kind of journeys and stuff like that. But we just got off a call, you know, at 9:30. We were with a lot of our kind of small group leaders in the campus, which was probably a call of about 50 people. And so our whole campus here is probably, you know, somewhere at like just shy of 200 people. And so I think knowing you guys, I think is like, I feel like just so inspired by you guys, and have so much respect for people that are a part of, you know, just smaller churches around the country and around the world. I think it's really easy, you know, like a campus ministry of 200 or the church we're at in Atlanta. It's really easy for, you know, people just to kind of rely on everybody else for a lot of their faith. And I think seeing you guys here, I think just gives me a lot of just courage and inspiration. I think just because it means that you guys are all just extraordinarily faithful, committed, perseverant people, and really love God. And so I just feel like just grateful to have even more of a connection. And I love talking about family. I think family, just kind of like what Dad was saying, has been God's plan from the very beginning. I mean, when everything was going crazy, he's like, okay, the way I'm going to fix the world is I'm going to choose one family, and I'm going to use them and use their kids to make a difference and really show the world who I am. And you see everybody, you see the 80-year-olds like Moses, and then you see the 8-year-olds like Josiah, right? You see the 10-year-olds like Emmett, right? Like all these guys that really made a difference, and were people that God used to really show himself and his character to the rest of the nations and stuff like that. And so to me, it's kind of like, if a family is doing really great, then if families doing great around the world, then the whole world is going to be doing really, really great. Yeah, but did you want to say anything before I tell a story?
I was just going to tell a story, but I can tell my story after you.
Okay. So the other day I was talking with this guy. His name is Jacinto, and he was the guy that DJ'd our wedding a couple of years ago. He's this big guy from Panama that is just this awesome dude, and he has an adopted son. And so he was calling me because he was in a class that Mom and Dad did, a few months ago when they were here in Atlanta. And he was just asking me, from the kid's perspective, from the son's perspective, he was asking, how do I create a culture in my family with a culture of listening and respect in my family? How do I do that as a dad? And how do I do it more like from your angle as the son that was kind of getting that? What would you say? And again, it's always interesting when you're talking about your own family, because you're like, a lot of the things in our family are probably really cheesy to other people, or really different, because everybody kind of has their own way that they do things. And And so you're never quite sure if like, did we just get lucky because this random thing kind of worked, you know, when we were young, or is it like, and so it's always like, was there a secret sauce and stuff like that? And so, you know, it's always just kind of interesting to sharing. And so I just started talking. I was like, you know, one of the things I felt like that was a pillar in our family was just that concept of being great listeners. And I felt like, you know, with mom and dad, mom says that she wasn't a great listener, but, you know, I think she's an extraordinary listener. And I think for me, like one of the things that dad was telling me, you know, as we've been trying to get to know how are we going to, as we're going into youth and family, how do we really create and help strong families? He made a interesting point. He was saying, you know, the families that you find that are really great listeners, where the parents are really great listeners, you'll rarely find one of those families that isn't doing really great. And a lot of times when you see families that are, you know, maybe struggling or having a lot tougher of a time, a lot of times you can point to it's maybe because the parents weren't really great listeners. And I thought that was just a really interesting point. And I was sharing with this brother Jacinto and talking to him about some of that kind of stuff, talking about some of the conversations that dad and I would have where it wasn't just him listening. It was him definitely just kind of listening to me, asking me questions, kind of like not just, hey, how'd your day go? But kind of those deeper questions of, hey, how did that make you feel? Or how you really doing, you know, with this kind of stuff? Or like even questions where he was kind of asking me to evaluate him and our family. He would ask me things like, hey, what do you think we need to do better as a whole family? What do you think we need to do better? Like, what do you think mom and I need to do better? And what it built in me was this kind of mutual respect between us, where it wasn't like, this is my dad and he's trying to like, just, you know, get me to respect him. It was, no, I really want to respect you. And it was kind of like this mutual respect we had, you know, for one another, where I felt like there was a two-way respect, you know, going on. And I felt like because of that, it made it a safe place to open up about a lot of just random stuff that I was feeling, or mistakes that I had made, and embarrassing kind of conversations, and knowing that it was going to be a safe place. And I think what built that was because I think so often, I know for me, even just kind of working with the campus ministry, it can tend to be like, there's kind of like your fun time together. And then there's a separate box where you kind of put like, okay, now it's our spiritual religious time. And so you kind of go to that box sometimes. You're like, okay, we need to have a deep talk. Let's kind of switch into that. Like we need to kind of be in that certain mode. And I felt like what we did as a family, and what mom and dad really helped us with a lot, was like, it wasn't necessarily these kind of different boxes. It was just all kind of a part of life. We're just having conversations as we're going, kind of that Deuteronomy 6, just as you're walking on the street, as you're sitting at the table, as you're getting up, all this kind of stuff. It's just like kind of working in conversations, working in just kind of deep conversations in the middle of, you know, hitting the Taco Bell drive-thru at midnight together, you know, as we're just kind of going through, talking about some, you know, some deep things, or watching a game, and during a commercial. It's just, you know, he's kind of like getting in these deep conversations that it wasn't kind of like separate. And it's now it's like, okay, now we're in church mode. It was like, no, we're just kind of talking as a family, and talking real, and talking deep. And one of the questions his brother asked me, he was just like, you know, like, how do I set that culture? Is like, do I have a set aside time, or this is our deep time? And it's kind of like, for me, that would have been a little bit, I feel like, awkward, you know, because it was more like, it didn't feel as real. It felt like we can't really be deep in real life. We have to be deep more in this designated time. And what I was also expressing was like how dad, for me, he would also tell me a lot about things that were going on in his life, where he was, you know, struggling with some things, or kind of worried about some things, or some of his fears. And as I was talking to this guy, he started just bawling, and he started weeping with me on the phone. And he was saying, Nick, this is just crazy powerful, because I come from a place where my dad had left me, and when I was really young. And so I have no idea, you know, what that experience is like, having a dad like that really wants to listen to you and cares, you know, about what you're feeling, what you're going through, and stuff like that. And he's like, I feel so excited to break the cycle, you know, with my own family, with my own son. And that was like, and you know, I started crying, you know, because one of those things where it's like the power in not like just some secret kind of formula, but just kind of like the simplicity of saying, that we're just going to listen and talk and just have these conversations, and even not being afraid to dive into those, even just awkward conversations. And might be kind of awkward at the beginning, but it's kind of like there's only one way to break that. And it's not going to be this designated awkward combo kind of time. It's going to be just kind of diving in, you know, in the midst of just everyday life. And so that was some of the stuff I think that really helped me a lot. And, you know, I was kind of actually really surprised this guy kind of got so emotional with this, because it seems so simple, but also I felt like as I was listening to it, it really affected me to sudden how powerful it is when we just take time to listen to each other. And the word that I felt like is really underrated, and one that I feel like that's lost in our world today, is just that word curiosity, where it's kind of like we're curious about one another. And that's not just on like a parent and kid kind of level, but that's in, you know, I know one of the first things to go, you know, when I was living with my other roommates and stuff, in college and after college, was, you know, we just kind of exist together, but there's not like a curiosity about each other, what we're kind of going through, what we need. And so that curiosity, like, it's always, to me, really, when you see somebody that's genuinely curious in you, like when you're around people that are genuinely curious about like what's going on in your life, and that really want to know, it like really stands out, and it makes you feel super loved when people are just kind of asking questions and are genuinely curious. And I feel like just that word curiosity, I think, is something that Jesus had so much when he didn't have to know a lot of things. And, you know, even God in the garden, like what Dad was talking about, when they messed up, God asks like 4 or 5 questions first, you know, before he engages in any sort of comment towards people. He's like, hey, where are you? Why are you hiding? Like, who told you that you weren't supposed to do that? There was this curiosity that God had. And then you see Jesus with the same thing. Like, how long has the boy been like this? Or what's in the scriptures? How do you read that? Or, you know, kind of these different conversations and curious questions that Jesus would ask people just as he was in everyday life with people, that I think made them feel really safe to kind of open up. And not that Jesus was primarily just my teacher to kind of teach me things, or as a parent, my job is just to teach my kid things. It is about kind of that curiosity of like, I want to connect and just kind of get to know you on the deeper inside kind of parts as well. And I think that isn't just for like the biological family, but that's just in the church family, in the workplace, at school. It's like genuinely curious people, I think, really are outstanding, you know, and kind of really make a big difference. And and just that simple act of listening kind of really changes people and stuff like that. And so that's one of the big things that I think that stood out for me growing up, was just this genuine curiosity that I think even started with my grandparents, you know, and goes into obviously my mom and dad, and stuff that I feel like I'm not super great at. Is just I have to intentionally be curious, because it's, you know, sometimes you kind of like talking more about yourself and people being curious in you, but it's that idea of, you know, how can I just take a genuine curiosity in the people around me, my kids, my parents, you know, and things like that. And so that was really helpful for me. And so, what was the story you can tell?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's just really cool to be here with you guys. So thanks for letting us join, like Nick said. But it's cool. I wanted to share a story about my mom, and it's just cool to know that you guys know her and you have met her. So it's not a question mark of a face, but you've met her. But my parents, I don't know how much of their personal stories that they shared, but my mom was orphaned by the time she was 9. My dad was raised by a single mom who was really struggling for a lot of his life, and had an abusive stepfather. And so both of them came from kind of, you know, just tough parenting situations. And so when they became disciples and then they got married and then they became parents to my sister and I think they were super committed to like, we just, you know, we want to be the parents that we never had. And I'm really grateful for that. I feel really just lucky and loved. But something that if I could like sum up, like if my parents emphasized anything growing up, it would be just really seeing people. And I love how Steve mentioned that, like Deuteronomy 6 of loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, that being like the key verse of the universe. That's such a cool thought. But I think something that my mom especially is just really great at is seeing God in people, and being able to like, kind of one of our first like memory verses as kids was Philippians 2, where he says, Paul's talking about Timothy, and he's like, I have no one else like him who takes a genuine interest in my welfare. And so my mom always would be like, hey, when you talk to people, look them in the eyes. You look wherever you look, to the right or to your left, you're meant to be next to that person, look them in the eyes, ask them a question. There's a story that, that stuff was just kind of ingrained in us. And I think it's because she came from not just being an orphan, and kind of her and her sisters raising themselves. But then she had cancer when she was 17, kind of went through that alone, lost her leg. There weren't a lot of amputees that were 18-year-olds, at that time. And she just had to she was undeterred by people's suffering, I think. And she's not scared of suffering. And so I think she just really instilled that in us. And this specific kind of season of memories that I have that I'm really grateful for is in high school, when I was sophomore, junior, before I was driving. I would walk home from school. We only lived like a mile from my high school. And my mom and I got into this habit where, don't judge her, okay, because I know you're all in Vermont, but she drinks instant coffee, and she still drinks instant coffee. And we all judge her for it and make fun of her. But I started drinking instant coffee with her in high school. And so she would, every time I would walk home, be a little bit sweaty from a mile walk, North Carolina, and I'd get home and she would make me a cup of instant coffee, and we just got into this habit where there'd be sometimes a few minutes, sometimes it would turn into like 30 minutes or an hour before I kind of did homework or did my next thing. We would just sit on the couch and talk. And we would talk about my day. She would listen. And what I'm so grateful for is I felt like, especially as a high schooler, when everybody's insecure in high school, I definitely was insecure in high school. I'm processing through my day. I'm like, wow, this girl, this happened with this girl in math class, or, at lunch, they were talking about this, or, I'm just talking to my mom, processing through my day. And my mom would be like, oh, like that girl in your math class, her parents are going through a divorce, right? And I'd be like, oh, I didn't know. She'd be like, yeah, gosh, I can't imagine. And it just totally rewrote my narrative for the day. Like, it just changed my perspective, because all of a sudden it's not just my world that I'm focused on and my insecurities, but she helped me really see other people's stories. And we got into this habit where I'd process through my day, and it was almost like she would just process with me, like seeing people and seeing my classmates and my teammates. I played lacrosse, and she would just help me understand kind of that everybody is a part of a story. And I think what that did for me, not just in teaching me how to really have compassion and love people, but I think it did really teach me to see God in people, and that Deuteronomy 6 of loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, like just really being able to, when I eventually became a disciple later in high school and really wanted to walk with Jesus and do it his way, I think it helped me understand, like, God and I are partners in this world. Like, it's not just me and God, here's our relationship, and I hope people see it and it's a light, but wow, we're partners in entering your world, Sarah from math class, and how are you doing? And just really Philippians 2:20 in it, of looking in their eyes and taking a genuine interest. So I think if I could share anything, that's something that my parents really emphasized a lot. And you might have met my mom, and she probably somehow looked you in the eyes on a Zoom call and just saw your soul. That's how she does it. And you might have seen that a little bit, but she's so good at that, and I'm just really grateful she instilled that in my sister and I.
You guys missed out if you were in person, because she'd be right here. She'd be talking to
She
you like
has
this.
absolutely no bubble.
Right,
Like
so
none. She meets you and you're like, what's your name and how do you spell that and how's your dog doing?
So yeah. Anyway, what I learned is, like, this kind of stuff doesn't only just apply to families, but really hearing Mackenzie wake up, or come back from a night shift, and her other roommate's about to go into work, and it's their 30 minutes of just being able to process through their day together, and just kind of that genuine curiosity with each other. And so to me, it just totally, it transcends, just the core family. It goes to just all of our relationships in general, is that idea of just talking together, having conversations, and genuinely listening kind of wherever we go. And so we're grateful to be able to share some of that stuff, and grateful to have even a deeper connection with you guys. But thanks for letting us hop on and join. And it's just good to see everybody's face.
So during that time, I switched to phone. Can you guys hear me? You hear me? Okay, good. Because we were cutting out a little bit, and Devin was instructing us as to how to get our audio back together. Nick and Bree, you guys are amazing. Love you guys so much. It's really fun just to have the gang get a chance to know you guys a little bit. We really look forward to having you guys here in person, as well as Mackenzie, and just getting a chance to be together. But we did have that experience, Bree, with your mom. With Noelle, she took a genuine interest in every single person on the call, and she was in there asking, oh, "Tell me 3 things about you. Tell me 3 things about you." And it was powerful because they've had so many experiences, and it was just powerful to hear them take a genuine interest in each one of us. And I can totally see her, doing that in the family, and also, training the girls to really do that as well. I wanted to conclude with a couple of thoughts, and then we're going to share communion together. And I just wanted to talk to the dads for a moment. Because I do think that the dads have a special role in the family and a special role in helping the family be family strong. And, in Ephesians it says, fathers, don't exasperate your children, but bring them up in the training, instruction of the Lord. Strong leadership in the family, dads, is Jesus leadership. It's servant leadership. It's leading like he would in our families, and it involves a lot of encouragement, and it involves a lot of listening. In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29, it says, "Let no unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs." And I think for dads in the family, there's no place that's more important than in the family. Is for us to really be connected to others' needs, and for us to offer words of encouragement, because it can be so easy to be angry, it can be so easy to react, or it can be so easy as a father who's got so many other responsibilities and so many other things going on in their life to kind of check out, because there's so many cares and concerns in our lives. So encouraging words. Think about Jesus and all of the encouraging words that he gave to every kind of person, and that he even gave to the kids. Jesus was so welcoming of children and so welcoming of every type of person. The second thing I think is listening. In James it says, let's start. How does it start? It says, in James it says, how does it start? I want to just check that. What was that memory scripture back in the day? Right. It says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because anger does not bring about the righteous life that God requires. And I think brothers, dads, I think not only just dads, but I think for all the men on the call, the most important skill that we can learn and we can give our attention to in terms of our relationships is listening. And not listening just to the information, but listening to the heart. Does that make sense? It's so important that we become able to listen to our daughter's heart. It's so important that we be able to speak from our heart, and not just from our head, and not just from information. I got to hold the closer. It's so important that we learn to become good listeners. And master that ability to connect through listening and through talking. And it's a skill. It's not something that we can't learn. It's a skill. If we want to learn it, sometimes we say, well, how do I listen to my daughter? Well, the first place to go is to ask her, and to say, so how can I be the person in our relationship that I need to be for you? And have that conversation with our kids, have that conversation with our wife, and have that conversation with our friends. Because listening, at the end of the day, soon I used to work with the preteens for a few years and directing the preteen camp up in Maine for New England. And the one thing that kids would say the most often is, my parents don't listen to me. That's the thing we'd hear the most often.
My parents don't listen to me. That's the thing I hear the most often from wives, is my husband doesn't listen to me, and so forth. And it's not an issue of just the head stuff. It's an issue of listening to the heart and the feelings. And it takes a real investment of relationship to be able to do that. So we're going to take communion here in a moment. And the thing I wanted us to think about is that God and Jesus are the great listeners. God is willing to listen to you and to me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The longest book in the Bible, the Psalms, is all about humans expressing themselves to God and God listening to that. Isn't that amazing? It's not about God talking all the time. It's not about God giving us rules all the time or principles all the time. It's God listening to us and wanting to listen to us and wanting to listen to our heart. And so in communion, we get to celebrate that. Jesus was the great listener. He didn't come as someone who was just issuing edicts all the time. He came and asked questions, like Nick was saying. He came and listened to people. You know, sometimes in my weakness as a dad, I didn't have the answers, and I felt insecure about that. And I felt like, oh gosh, what am I going to say in this situation? But what I realized is that the more powerful thing is to listen to the heart, and sometimes just to be quiet and just to learn and take that genuine interest. And sometimes in that situation, I felt weak and I felt insecure, but I realized as I did that, and as I kind of navigated some of those times, that's what my friends and my family needs the most from me, is those listening and encouraging words. And that's God. God doesn't talk all the time. God wants to listen, and then he speaks to our hearts and moves us at just the right time. You know, Jesus is the same way. Even on the cross, he was listening. Isn't that incredible? Even on the cross, he was listening and paying attention and taking an interest in the people around him. And he was noticing, like Bree was saying, and seeing. And it's just amazing that they led their family and that they lead their family in that way. And so as we take the bread, as we take the juice, let's remember how God, our Father, who art in heaven, whose name is holy, how he loves us and listens to us and values us and pays attention to us, and honors us and respects us and died for us and rose again for us. Incredible. Let's pray, and then let's enjoy the communion together. Father, thank you so much for this time, just to think about you, to think about how we can be better for one another, how we can have some simple things in our own families, God, that will help us to love you with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Thank you for being so faithful to us. Thank you for being so real for us. God, thank you for letting us express our whole being to you and connecting our whole being to you through Christ, through Jesus. We're so thankful. And we just want to think about that here for a couple of minutes while we take communion. We love you, God. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.